Okay, hello. This is a ceramic mug. If I were to throw this on the floor, throw it against a wall, it would break and shatter into a million pieces. You could try and put it back together, maybe hot glue it, but it's never going to be the same, and no one's going to want to use a broken cup. This exact metaphor is what was used in my middle school sex ed class to talk about virginity. The comparison was that your virginity was like a cup, and once it was broken, no one would ever want you or it again. Clearly, this didn't accomplish a lot. No one really learned what sex was, what kind of contraception to use. And the same year, a girl in my 8th grade class got pregnant and had a miscarriage in the school bathroom. Yeah. My name is Alyssa Miller, and today I'm going to talk to you about the need for government-mandated comprehensive sex education. I've learned a lot about this topic through my involvement in female empowerment groups in the past where we talked about this, and I also researched it a lot for this speech. Today I'm going to talk to you and explain that American teenagers have really poor sexual health, and that this comes from a lack of information that can be fixed by government-mandated comprehensive sex education. But to define this, first we need to define what is sexual health. What do I mean when I say that American teenagers have poor sexual health? According to the World Health Organization, sexual health is a state of physical, emotional, mental, and social well-being in relation to sexuality. So if a group has good sexual health, there are a couple factors that are present. There's a lack of STDs, HIV and AIDS are successfully prevented, pregnancies are healthy and intended and wanted, and that there's an inclusion of LGBT people in sex ed. This is important because, like it or not, teenagers in the US are sexually active. 47% of teenagers in high school were found to be sexually active by a 2011 survey by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. But of these 47%, only 60% of American teenagers report using a condom or any kind of contraception. Not using any kind of contraception has two big issues. The first of these is sexually transmitted diseases and infections in American teenagers. Young people ages 15 to 24 only make up 24% of the sexually active population. However, they make up 50% of each year of all the new STD diagnoses. That's 9.8 million young people, or 39% of young people that will get an STD each year, ages 15 to 24. The other major issue is that we have a really, really high teen pregnancy rate. The US has the highest teen pregnancy rate in the industrialized world, and that's including pretty much anywhere in Europe. Dr. Melissa Kearney at UMD found that the US teen is 10 times more likely to get pregnant than someone in Switzerland. And this is probably, at least in my belief, due to lack of education on contraception or even sex in general. And then American teenagers, since there is this lack of education and kind of a stigma associated with teen mothers, they're more likely to drop out of high school, more likely to end up in poverty. So why does this exist? Because of lack of education. According to the National Conference of State Legislation, 24 out of 50 states require sex ed. That leaves over half the states not requiring sex ed. And of these 24, only 20 require that the information actually be medically accurate. So that leaves 4 states where it's required but doesn't actually have to be true. If it's not required to be true, it won't be, which is what has been seen by studies and articles. Huffington Post went around the country and decided to interview a bunch of teens about their sex ed classes. The two that stuck out the most to me were the stories of Kathy O'Donnell and Jeremy Gopfert. Kathy O'Donnell vividly remembered being told in her sex ed class by a male teacher that there was no such thing as rape because the thigh muscles in a woman's leg would prevent that. It was really crazy. And then Jeremy Gopfert remembered being told that condoms were effective less than 70% of the time, which led a lot of kids in his class to wonder why they should even bother using them at all if they weren't going to be effective. These are both just completely wrong, and the fact that it's being told kind of defeats the purpose of sex ed in the first place because you're not actually teaching them anything that's true. The other issue is that when we do teach sex ed, a lot of times it's abstinence-only sex education. In fact, the US Congress has spent $25 billion teaching abstinence-only sex education. A lot of groups argue for this, such as the National Abstinence Education Association, or like lobbying groups such as Focus on Family, because they argue that by doing abstinence-only sex education, it's the best way, because being abstinent is the only way to ensure that you don't get STDs or an unintended pregnancy. This isn't wrong, it's the best way to prevent those things. However, abstinence-only sex education has been repeatedly found to be ineffective by research. The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services decided to do a test of abstinence-only sex education and those that didn't get any sex education at all. And they found that the average age of sexual debut, or like your first sexual encounter, was the exact same in both groups. And also they had similar numbers of sexual partners throughout their years. So it didn't really have any effect on them at all, other than possibly hurting them. A big part of abstinence-only sex education is virginity pledges. I know my middle school used them. You were either pressured into doing one or just told to do one, period. Basically, you pledge to not have sex until you get married. It can be really complicated, it can be really short. This one, they pledge to their country that they're not gonna have sex until they're married. And while virginity pledges have been moderately effective at delaying the onset of sex, it's normally only by a few months difference, but they do have effects in that if you take a virginity pledge, you're much less likely to use any kind of contraception, probably because you either have a stigma or a fear of sex, or you don't know what contraception is at all because you had abstinence-only education. But this means you're more likely to get STDs or an unintended pregnancy if you signed a virginity pledge. So how do we solve this issue? I believe we solve this issue through government-mandated comprehensive sex education with clear rules about what should be covered in sex education. According to the Sexuality Information and Education Center of the United States, comprehensive sex education should include a few things. It should include information on abstinence and how it is the only sure option, but it should include the benefits and side effects of different kinds of contraceptives. It should include information on HIV, AIDS, and other STDs. It should talk about rape, what qualifies as rape, the fact it is real, drugs and alcohol, and different kind of LGBT sex ed as well. Basically, over time, research has found that comprehensive sex education is the best option, it is effective, and it works. The National Survey of Family Growth found that teens were 50% less likely to get pregnant if they had comprehensive government-mandated sex ed. And then other outside groups have looked at this. The National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unplanned Pregnancy decided to go around the US and compare different types of sex ed. They reviewed 48 different comprehensive government sex ed programs. Of these 48, none of them caused increases in sexual activity, which is a lot of times what abstinence groups will argue, that by teaching people about sex, you're encouraging sex, and so they're going to go and have it more. They don't, all results show that they don't do that, and in fact, 66% delayed sexual activity and reduced the number of sexual partners they had in their lifetime. They also increased the use of contraceptives when they did finally have sex. In conclusion, young people in America have an issue, and that issue is poor sexual health. They have high rates of STDs, they have high rates of teen pregnancy. This can be fixed by government-mandated sex ed and comprehensive sex ed that includes all different types. Basically, everyone knows that sex ed is really uncomfortable. No one wants to go in and teach it. It's awkward to talk about sex with a bunch of middle schoolers and high schoolers, but by not talking about it, we're just leaving our teenagers in the dark. They're not gonna stop having sex because we don't talk about it. And in fact, we might actually be hurting them because they do have high rates of STDs and teen pregnancy. So if we really do care about our young people and our teenagers in America, we really need to invest in and require government-mandated comprehensive sex education. Thank you.